Morning, everyone. We are in the middle of the week. Happy Hump Day. Been working on something that Justin from Deconstruction Zone challenged me on. I was actually a little sad he didn't go live yesterday. I was looking forward to it. Let's see. Hope everyone's having a good morning so far, or whatever time of day it is for you. But let's see. Welcome, Tree. Thank you, everyone, for the likes. Let's see. See if we can get someone that will top our first guest from yesterday. It was still weird. Jesus didn't exist because the letter J didn't exist. What? Welcome everyone that's just joined. But I did change the title a bit. We'll see if that helps with the kind of guess. If I notice that the amount of guests drops, I'll probably switch back to the old one, but we'll see what happens. Because maybe the term Catholic Christian got more engagement, but we'll see what happens. So interesting story, Incredible Pain. I don't remember who my confirmation saint is. I was actually, so while I am a Roman Catholic and I was baptized in the Roman Catholic faith, I was actually confirmed under the Byzantine Rite. So long story short, the diocese that I was in by the time I was like 2-3 years old, this was, post Vatican II, there was a lot of stuff going on, and I don't know exactly what it was, but my mother was telling me that she was very concerned about some of the things that the priest and bishop of our area was having in regards to the Vatican. I don't know whether they were getting too loose with their interpretation of Vatican II or what exactly was going on, but she was very concerned about the what was being said. And so a friend of hers mentioned that she was getting their child baptized by a retired Byzantine bishop, and she was trying to get my youngest brother baptized. And the Byzantine Rite does baptism confirmation at the same time. And when the Byzantine bishop baptized and confirmed my brother, he offered to confirm me, and I was only like 2-3 years old at the time. So I actually don't remember who my confirmation saint was. But we've got someone in the guest. Oops, looks like they just dropped. But yeah, that was the So I don't actually know who my confirmation saint is because of that. However, I have a very strong devotion to Justin Martyr and Saint Francis of Assisi and Thomas Aquinas. It would so Scott. It would depend on how they arrive at the supernatural. So rationality doesn't guarantee truth. You have the difference between a valid and a sound argument. A sound argument guarantees truth because the premises are true and the conclusion logically follows from the premises. But a valid argument is something that just has the premise following from the conclusions, meaning that there were no logical fallacies committed. So just because we don't know the conclusion is true doesn't mean that it's irrational to hold it. For example, we don't know if the universe has a finite beginning or if it has an infinite past. Yet you have scientists on both sides holding to one position or the other, and they have rational reasons to hold to that position, even though we can't demonstrate one way or the other. So that's all rational means. It's just you have logic and reason based in your conclusions, and to say that there is so like versus someone who is just doing it based on vibes or based on emotion. But yeah. And if you're going to say that the only rational position is to say that you don't know, you might want to take it up with those scientists who, like I said, do say that, hey, no, I do think that the universe has a beginning, XYZ, or those that say, no, the universe has an infinite past because XYZ, because if we don't know, we don't have enough information one way or another, but they do say that, yes, this is how they hold. Oh, I'm not even talking about holy books or anything like that. But it looks like we got a request. Hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
Pretty good. I was just scrolling past and wondering, like, what are you? Because I heard some of the things that we were saying kind of lining up with this. But what are your opinions on agnosticism?
So it's going to depend on how one defines agnosticism, because depending on who you're talking to, there's several different definitions of it. I tend to prefer the definition where theism is the positive claim on the God question, atheism is the negative claim on the God question, and agnosticism is the position of not taking a position. And so I believe one can have rational justification for all three of those positions. So one can have a rational reason to be a theist. One can have a rational reason to say positively that there is no God. And one can have a rational reason to say, no, there isn't enough evidence to make a statement one way or another.
Yeah, I agree with what you said. And there are a lot of like different terms for agnosticism.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an agnostic, and I think, like, for me, agnosticism means like we don't have enough evidence to prove or disprove the existence of a God.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's all.
Yeah, and I have no issue with people holding that position, because it's going to depend a lot on what one requires in order for themselves to be convinced. But yeah, as far as like kind of like what I was saying earlier, something being rational is not it guaranteeing truth. It just means that you are justified in holding the conclusion. Are you familiar with the definition of knowledge as a justified true belief?
No.
Okay, so it's a very common definition. You do have some people who will push back on what qualifies something as being justified. But if knowledge is a justified true belief, so you have a belief, which is the conclusion in any particular situation. So just having a belief in and of itself is not rational. But if it's justified, then it is rational and if that belief is true and you can justify it, now you have knowledge. Basically what I'm saying is that one can justify a belief in God through rational means, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the God claim is true.
Oh, okay.
Any other questions?
No, that was all. Thanks.
Absolutely. You enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.
All right. Let's see. We got someone else in the box. Let's see. I think Serious Business was next. Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going all right. What brings you up here today?
What brings me up is I like these kinds of lives, if I'm gonna be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And not only this type of life, but there are, one of the extreme ones, or a couple of the extreme ones, where either they oppose the existence of a God, or they are, they are. How can I say it? They're absolutely convinced that God exists.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing I've come to realize is both sides, both the extreme side of being convinced that God doesn't exist, and also the other side of being convinced that God exists. I find both sides kind of funny and in a sense equal, because if we take the ones that oppose the existence of God, they like to, they are so convinced that God doesn't exist to the point where they can actually get emotional about it, aggressive about it. And so they kind of get angry at people that are convinced that God exists, but then they turn around and do the exact same thing that the people that believe that God exists do, right? So it's I see kind of the same coin, but two different sides, emotionally and psychologically.
So while there is some truth to that, part of it has to do, I think, unfortunately, there are a lot of bad faith actors on the theist side, and there's a lot of abuse and horrible things done in the name of religion, in the name of theistic belief. And you have these people who have been genuinely and seriously harmed by religion. Like religious trauma is real, and that's a sad and horrible thing. And so you have these people who have experienced this religious trauma are now being exposed to people who are putting these individuals back in a situation where they are now reliving that trauma, and that's causing that response in them. You also have individuals who are saying really hateful, hurtful, and terrible things about their fellow human beings. And, at that point, it all becomes a distraction from the God question. And so there's a lot of emotion and a lot of history to the point where it's become almost like a Hatfield and McCoy type of feud, where both sides have been hurt so much by the other side that until people are willing to just lay down the weapons and extend the hand in peace, which is what I'm trying to do with something like this, it's going to cause the conversation to come to a stalemate until people actually start willing to have an actual conversation.
Yeah, I agree with many of the things that you said. At the end of the day, I can only speak for myself and my thoughts. So if I may share a little bit what I think. So, you know, I can't help but to think like this. If God exists, then what? It doesn't really make any difference in my life. If God doesn't exist, it doesn't really make any difference there either. Now, if we go deeper into any of these two paths, we can take the path of many atheists that I see, on online. They use the example, for example, oh, but if God is so good, then why does God let X, Y, and Z thing happen? For example, why do children get some illness or disease or whatever? Shouldn't a good righteous God prevent those things from happening? But then I think, I can't help but think that, well, if a God has the power literally to create a universe, now imagine how big and how powerful and how energy dense the universe is. Why would a God bother with those tiny, minuscule things that we as humans experience? I mean, if you can create a universe and you give the blessing to the creatures, to your creation, to, for example, conduct science, to prevent diseases and whatnot, wouldn't that be a better? Because this also then leads to, if God judges me for doing the right thing, and I actually go out of my way to try to do the right thing, such as becoming a scientist, somehow contributing to preventing illnesses in children. So if God exists, wouldn't God reward me for that? Do you get kind of how it's all linked together?
Yeah, so I do agree with your point. It's like, as far as like the question of like God exists, like if we answer the question yes or no, it doesn't really change people's lives for the most part. Especially if the answer is no. If the answer is yes, then the next question that needs to be asked is, what kind of God is it? Because like if it's the God that you initially were describing, where it doesn't care about us, which actually is a viable possibility for the God question, then yeah, nothing's going to change. So the thing is that people will get to the God question, they'll say yes, and then they'll plug their particular religious God in there way too quickly. But it sounds like you agree with the statement that belief in God is rational, even if we can't ultimately know the answer to that question. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say so.
Okay. Well, hey, I'm glad you were able to come on up and share your thoughts. I'm mostly looking for people who disagree and think that no matter what, belief in God is irrational. So I think I'll move on to the next guest, but I do appreciate you coming up and sharing your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much. Have a nice day.
You too.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. So I think Geiger was next. Let's see. Oops, looks like he left. So we'll get... There we go.
Hello.
Hey, John, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. What brings you up here?
No, I just wanted to discuss this topic
Yeah.
with you. So you're a Catholic specifically.
Yes, I am a Catholic. However, for this particular conversation, the kind of like as I was touching on at the end there, the question of which specific God or which religion is true, it's much further downstream than the particular question I'm looking to focus on today. I want to kind of keep it to a generic, almost philosophical God at this point.
Okay, so I know we're just gonna keep it at the philosophical God, but I was just curious. Do you think there is do you think there is a you can believe in the wrong God, just out of curiosity?
Yes. One can, like, as an example, one can have a justified belief in, in Odin. One can have a justified belief in Zeus. Rationality or having a justified belief doesn't guarantee truth.
Okay.
So I'm not sitting up here trying to say, oh, it is true that God exists. I'm just saying, trying to counter the claim that I see a lot of times where people say, oh, if you believe in God, it is automatically irrational to hold that
Okay.
belief. You are automatically being irrational.
Interesting. Okay. Um, I think I understand. To me, I feel like most people, and you could totally disagree with me. I feel like most people believe in God because they need the emotional anchor to deal with a lot of the things in life that are incredibly difficult. And I also think that a lot of the explanations for why we exist as human beings or how the world is not generally satisfactory for most people. Um, I think, and you could totally disagree with me, I feel like given what we know about science and how, generally speaking, um, things go from being like simplistic, right? So if you look at like organisms from billions of years ago, you have single-celled organisms, and then over time you get more and more complex organisms. So you're going from simplicity to complexity, and so since we're seeing that kind of, I guess, trend in general, I just don't know if purporting a god makes that much sense because you're taking something that is incredibly complicated, like a supreme being, and then purporting that that's the reason why the universe exists, where what we're seeing, generally speaking, is that the universe is going from simplicity to complexity. So that would just be my first argument, but we can go from there.
So first off, I would agree that yes, like a lot of people do hold belief in a God for irrational reasons. Whether it's because of emotional reasons or whatever the case may be. But just like how someone can have they can say that they believe and accept evolution, but they still have the very simplistic idea of humans evolving from monkeys, like
Yeah.
they can think that that's what evolution is, and it's not actually evolution in what they're believing. And so, but that doesn't mean that evolution in and of itself is false just because an individual holds to it for the wrong reason. But I do agree with you that for the most part, a lot of people will hold to a God idea for the wrong reason. However, I did want to touch on your argument about in nature we see things going from simple to more complex, yet it seems like as soon as you posit God, now it's like as the most complex thing you can think of, two simple things, two more complex things, and so it seems to break that trend. The God that I believe in, and the one that a lot of philosophers believe in, is a God that is purely simple. Have you heard of the dogma of divine simplicity?
No, I've never heard this before, actually. So
Okay, all right, not a problem. So, the dogma of divine simplicity, it is a philosophical idea, but you will find it in classical theism as well, specifically with classical Judaism and classical Christianity. You will find and it's harder to find it, but there are some Islamic thinkers who hold to this idea as well. But the idea is that God is not made of parts. He is, and that because that's what complexity means, is
okay.
An increased number of parts, so to speak. So you have a single-celled organism, multi-celled organism, and that's where that complexity comes in. And so the idea here is that God is purely simple. He has no parts other than the fact that he is existence itself.
Okay.
The way that I like to describe it in modern language, essentially, is God is a being whose identity is existence. If I was to ask you, hey, what are you? As in, what is your identity? You would say, I am a human being.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the most, I think, simplest and easiest ways, especially if you're a little bit familiar with Platonic and Aristotelian metaphysics, is Thomas Aquinas' book titled On Being in Essence, where he goes through this. But he talks about how eventually, if you keep breaking down the material things, you get to whatever the most basic material thing is. Like, he's not identifying it, but he's just like, even if we get to something where we can't break that material thing down further, we still have the material thing plus what it is, which he identifies as form. So we have the material thing plus form. Well, the form is more simple than just the material. So therefore, let's look at the form. But then we get to this problem. Now we have form plus the fact that the form exists. That's still composite. So therefore, the most simplest thing that can't be further divided is something where its existence is the same as its identity instead of existence being added onto its identity. That purely simple, that cannot be further divided, is God.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm completely following this. So basically, since God is essentially existence itself, therefore that is the most it's in a way it's I hope I'm just describing this accurately. It's simplicity in and of itself because he is existence. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And the reason why it seems so complex and so hard to understand is, as Aristotle points out, the way that we understand things is we either break it down into its parts or we add the different parts together to come to understanding, like we do with mathematics. But the problem is, if you come to something that is purely simple, you can't break it down into its further parts.
Okay.
Because there's nothing it can be broken down into, so we can't come to that a deeper understanding of it.
Okay.
And then we also can't add anything onto it, because as soon as we do, now we're no longer talking about that thing. It'd be like if I was to say, hey, I am talking about, a dog. And then you add on, wings to the dog. Well, now I'm no longer talking about dog because you added onto something that's not a part of the identity of the dog. So because of that, that's why God is hard to talk about, not because he's complex in his parts, but because he has no parts, and that very lack of parts makes it hard for us to talk about it.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so what was I gonna say? So is it because essentially he or God essentially he create how do I put this? He's essentially those things to begin with, or he's creating those things, like the concept of simplicity, the concept of complexity. So we can't really judge him by those standards, is what I want to. Is that you wouldn't phrase it like that? Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't phrase it like that. The way that I would phrase it is more of, because of the way that our minds comprehend things.
Okay.
Like the way that I like to describe it is pointing to H.P. Lovecraft's cosmic horror. I like to call it benevolent cosmic horror. If you ever read those stories, you would know that the characters in those stories, when they encounter, Cthulhu or these other cosmic entities, these cosmic entities are so far beyond our understanding that human language fails.
I get what you're saying.
Now, for God, it's like it's so far beyond our understanding, in the sense that, like, we can't break it down to make it simpler to understand, because it already is as simple as it can be, that human language fails. Because we can.
So essentially, like, our concepts don't necessarily, of our notions of things, how generally they work, simply just can't apply to such a being, essentially.
In a literal sense, Thomas Aquinas talks about how we can use analogical terms. So, like, the omni traits normally attributed to the Christian God, like, they are proper to say, like, it is proper to say that God is good, but it's not that God has goodness as a property. It's just that when we encounter the divine essence in reality, to us, it has an effect that seems similar to what we would call good. So we say that God is good, but it's not a literal property, because, again, all God is just existence.
So would you say, No, this is very fascinating. I've never heard this before. So,
Not like you're not going to find it a lot on platforms like this, especially by a lot of evangelical Christians,
yeah,
and even by a lot of Catholics. Classical theism, while very popular within Catholicism, it's really only popular amongst like the high level theologians, like the people you'll see at like Catholic Answers, Jimmy Akins, Trent Horn,
yeah,
and Bishop Barron. But as far as like the common layperson, like they'll be familiar with maybe the five ways, but that's about it for Thomas.
yeah. I've noticed with a lot of evangelicals, and I was friends with somebody where who was like this and was actually a very right wing, or to the point where it was like she like and conspiratorial, where it's like she thinks the Earth is flat and all this sort of stuff. Where essentially they just want these kind of certainties in life, where it's exactly this is exactly what it is, blah 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 blah. And so sometimes it's very difficult to talk to people like that because they're not dealing, in my opinion, with a lot of the complexities of the world and stuff like that. But again, what was I going to try to get to? No, because I found this I guess because I'm not as obviously you seem like obviously a very well read person, like obviously talking about Aristotle and Plato and theology and things like that. Also, what's your first name, by the way? I just want to, if you feel comfortable.
I try not to give my real name,
Okay.
but so my online is Catholic Thinker, but a lot of people call me CT.
Oh, okay, that's fine. I was just I wanted to be as respectful as possible. So anyway, what was I going to say? So are these things okay? So this is the other problem that I guess I have with theology at times. I think what you're talking about, it makes a lot of sense. It's very interesting, but we can't know for sure any properties about the nature of the creator, right? You're in a sense, you're just purporting that this is what the creator would potentially be like, or this is what we can potentially do. There's no way to actually, in a sense, prove it on a in the way that you could prove that would say atoms exist or something like that. Does that make sense? Or am I
No, so I get what you're saying. So like the question then becomes, all right, so I can see why you would posit like this could be the kind of God that would exist. But how do we go about proving that? And there's several ways that one can prove something. And you mentioned like proving that atoms exist, and we can prove that through empirical method. However, what's interesting is that several hundred years before Plato, I forget what they were called, but you did have these Greek philosophers that like, hey, if you take rocks and you smash them together, they break into these tiny pieces. What if everything is just made up of these teeny tiny little pieces of matter that can't be further subdivided? And that their term, what they call that little tiny piece of matter is what we call the modern day. Like we took that term, I forget what the Greek term of it is, and applied it to what we now call the atom.
Yeah. I forget the guy's name who did that. But yeah, continue.
But yeah, so like what I was getting at there though is that you can use logic and reason to arrive at true conclusions. And are you familiar with the difference between a valid argument and a sound argument?
No, I don't. I'm not
familiar. So a valid argument is something where the conclusion just follows from the premises if the premises are true. Basically meaning that the structure of the argument is logically valid. It's not committing any fallacies. And it's a case of like, if these premises are true, then the conclusion is true. Meaning, if you think that the premises are true, you have to accept the conclusion.
Yes.
A sound argument is one in which the premises are indeed true, which means that the conclusion has to be true. So by that, what I mean is we can use logic and reasoning, even if we don't have sufficient empirical evidence to support it. Where if an individual accepts these premises as true, then they ought to accept the conclusion.
Yes.
And if we know the premises are true, then we can know that the conclusion is true, even if we haven't empirically shown the conclusion. So that is how I think one would be able to prove that a God exists, or even that this kind of God exists. And I am working on an argument. Are you familiar with unapologetic?
Unapologetic. No, I haven't. I'm sorry. I'm
Okay.
sorry that I haven't heard any of these things. I
No, no, no,
haven't.
no, no. So Unapologetic is a call-in show. They go in every Sunday, and it's between Deconstruction Zone, Justin. I don't believe he's like got the like I don't think he's technically a biblical scholar, but his knowledge is on par with biblical scholars.
Yeah.
Then you have Dr. Blitz, who's a PhD physicist, and you have allegedly Ian. Now, allegedly Ian knows his philosophy very, very well. So you basically have like all three avenues of attack that Christians try to go in to prove God exists, handled in that one group. But I am good friends with allegedly Ian. I'm actually in their Discord, and I'll call in on Unapologetic to test my arguments that I'm working on. And I did show up to show this particular argument. And Dr. Blitz said that premise 1, premise 2 are fine. Premise 3 needs a little bit more tweaking because I'm trying to have it where it accounts for any worldview. And basically the only way that my premise 3 works is if PSR is the case, which is the principle of sufficient reason, which means that if something is there, then there is a reason for it, versus a brute contingent fact where there is no reason for it being the case.
Yeah.
So premise 1 is that something has always existed. Premise 2 is that there exists at least one independent thing. Premise 3, the independent in order for the independent thing to exist, it would need to have its existence as its identity. Per the law of identity, there can only be one independent thing. Therefore, there is only one independent thing whose identity is existence. Now, I do provide justifications for every single one of these premises, but if I was to do that, it would be like a 7-minute conversation.
Yeah, I feel like I'm too stupid to even understand exactly what you just said. We would have to go through it fairly.
You're good. But if you want to check it out, like I said, Unapologetic is on YouTube. Like I said, I am on. It's this past Sunday I did present it, and I also have the full video or the full justification for each premise in a video that's pinned on my profile. If you want to check that as
well. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, any other questions?
No, this was actually incredibly fascinating. It was nice to actually talk to somebody who actually has a fairly sophisticated view of these things, as opposed to somebody who's just asserting these things merely because they want to impose their religious worldview on the rest of us. So I do find it fascinating just to literally talk to somebody who has the intellectual ability to just justify what they're talking about. And I learned a lot today, so I really appreciate talking to you.
Appreciate it. Yeah, as someone told me not too long ago, it's like, you're taking these traditional apologetic arguments, but you're actually filling in the gaps that made them fallacious and making them no longer fallacious. Part of it is that I understand that apologetics is never meant to prove a particular religion as true. It's just meant to explain misunderstandings of it. Kind of like as you saw today, like I wasn't trying to prove to you that God exists. It was just like, hey, you're absolutely correct. Like we get complexity from multiplicity of simpler things. And so if the claim is that God is this ultimately complex thing, then yeah, that is contrary to our experience.
Yeah.
But there are positions out there that hold that God is this purely simple thing, from which everything else gets its complexity.
No, that's very fascinating. No, I just followed you on TikTok, and I'll definitely, because I like to keep an open mind about things. I don't like being dogmatic, because obviously there's flaws in everyone's thinking.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I necessarily disagreed that the belief in God was rational. I just wanted to, I guess, have a discussion and have a conversation about it. But yeah, it was very nice talking to you.
Thank you so much. It was great having you up here.
Yeah, have a great rest of your day.
You too. All right, let's see. Let's see who's next. Mr. Shrimp, I see you in there, and I know you tried to join last time you were here, so what's up?
What up? What up?
How's it going?
I'm fine. You?
I'm doing all right. What brings you up here today?
Um, I want to know like you were just talking about divine simplicity with
Hmm.
the last guy, and I think divine simplicity is just a bad explanation because um first let me get your definition because I don't want to assume what like your
Hmm.
definition of divine simplicity is. So go ahead and give me your definition.
Yeah, so all divine simplicity, as I was explaining, is just the statement that God is existence itself, that there's no other properties in God other than the fact that he exists.
Okay. So all the attributes like the omnipowers like love, justice, and all of those things are just the same thing basically.
There's different ways of parsing that. My personal understanding is it's not that they are one and the same thing. So it like I wouldn't say that like knowledge and goodness are one and the same thing. However, it is the case that when we have an experience of the divine essence, whatever that is, whether it's through the created world or how that looks, we have an experience that we would call good, or we have an experience that we would call not knowledge, or whatever we want to describe that as. And from there, we then say that we then attribute that effect onto the cause. But the divine essence doesn't actually have that as a property. And so we are only speaking of it as an analogy. Like, hey, there is something in the divine essence that appears to us as goodness. So we're speaking in the language of appearance, not literal reality, if that makes sense.
Okay. So um I mean I just think that is like it creates like a logical collapse if it's just us that we perceive things like in parts, for example,
Mhm.
like good and bad, and like power and knowledge and love and justice and those things. It's just our like our definitions, our linguistics are just you know arbitrary. Our logic is arbitrary, and then
So
it becomes like.
it's not that goodness doesn't exist. It's rather that the divine essence doesn't have goodness as a property, but goodness does indeed exist. So it's not that our language is arbitrary or all of these different things. It has more to do with the fact that because of the way that we understand things, because of the fact that we try to, in order for us to understand things, we have to break things down or add them on to each other, which we can't do with the divine essence. We then start speaking almost poetically. We start speaking via analogy in order to try to help us understand this thing that we can't understand. It's kind of like to kind of do like a reverse of it. Uh, if you've if you're familiar with the philosophical concept of nothing, nothing isn't the absence of a thing, or even the negation of a thing, because nothingness by like if I was to say, hey, nothingness is the absence of existing things, well, I can still talk about nothing as an object because it is in reference to the existing thing that it's in negation of. True
Mhm.
philosophical nothingness has no thing to talk about. Like it's not in relation to anything. It's pure nothingness. But the very fact that I'm trying to talk about it is turning it into a subject, which is turning it into a thing. So language collapses as soon as we try to talk about nothing because language is built around relationships between objects.
Mhm.
But nothing can't be an object, but the very moment we try to talk about it, we're turning it into an object, which it isn't is. So all we can do is really talk about it in this almost analogical sense. And we're doing something similar for God. that doesn't mean to say that what we're talking about for nothingness is false. It's just we have to understand the limitations of our language when we're talking about it.
Okay. So one more thing, like your video is also lagging. Is I don't know if it's just for me or for the whole life. Just point that out. But
Okay, I appreciate it. I'm not sure how I can tell on my end, but if anyone in the chat can let me know, I'll see what I can do.
all right. So anyway, so so you're not making this like distinctions between love, justice, omnipotence, goodness. Is that what you're saying?
No, so what I'm saying is like goodness, love, justice, and all of these things have real distinctions.
Okay.
And when we experience God, it seems like we are experiencing something that we would call love, but we're experiencing existence itself. So we're like, there are like, you will meet some people who will say that they do collapse into one and the same thing. I don't hold to that definition. I hold to the very strong idea of like, no, like they don't exist in God's nature. Like, even though it's proper to say that God is good, they don't exist. It doesn't exist in God's nature. And it's just our experience of it that we would call good, even though it's not literally or analogically, or literally or analytically there. It is just our attempt to describe something that we are very limited in our ability to describe.
Okay, so you think you do think it is they're distinct.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, and you also think those distinct parts are just, I think, the same as existence.
No. So so this is what I'm saying. Would you agree that bears are big, strong, ferocious beasts?
Yeah.
Okay. And if I was to say that, man, Mike Tyson was a bear in the boxing ring, you would understand me to mean that Mike Tyson has properties that make him similar to what we would call a bear, big, strong, ferocious beast, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're doing kind of the same thing when we're saying that God is good. It's not that God is good or God has goodness as a property. It's just that when we experience God, we see something in that experience similar to when we experience good. And so we call God good because of that similar experience, even though they're not one and the same.
Okay. So what about what about when we like experience bad things or evil things?
So
What are we-
that's going to get into the specific theological worldview, which is a little bit far beyond this. But like, for example, St. Augustine, which is how most Catholic theology understands evil is not an existing thing. It is a privation of a thing. It's called privation theory. And what that what that understanding is that you have, just like how darkness doesn't exist as a thing, it exists as the absence of light photons and particles. Even though we have experience of darkness and we talk about darkness as an existing thing, but it's really the absence of light that we're experiencing. In the theological framework that I operate in, evil isn't an existing thing. It is a privation of things that exist.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It's just that I still don't get like you said they're distinct, and like for example, God have like free will, right?
So that would, again, that's a much further question further down the road. So in divine simplicity, we can't say positive attributes of God. So like, I can't say that God has free will in a literal sense. I can't say that God has goodness in a literal sense. I can't say anything that is God has X. in order for me to be as accurate as I can be in my language, if I want to say something about God as literal as possible, I can only use negation. God has no limits. God is not temporally bound. I can only say things about what God is not. I can't say things about what God is other than that he is.
Okay, so well, okay.
Yes. So even like the question of like God has free will, like not in the way that you and I would think of free will. It's like I do agree and understand that like divine simplicity and how that works is very difficult to understand for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And you are like I did see you mention in the comment that it kind of evolves into some kind of collapse. And the point of divine simplicity is that yes, it does, because God is divinely simple. When we try to put these different attributes onto him, in reality, they're not distinct. What we're experiencing is the same thing. So it's
Yeah.
not. It's
It's just it's just like, okay, but in your view, I can't say, can I say like God is logical too or no?
Oh, again, no. The way that I would like to
Yeah.
describe it, though, is that just like how the laws of physics and the laws of science aren't like written down somewhere in reality in and of itself, but is our minds understanding the patterns of reality. Logic is us understanding the patterns of reality, which includes God and his interactions with reality.
So so from your explanation, I assumed like you don't use the transcendental argument or anything.
No, I hate tag.
Thank you very much. Okay, I appreciate you for that. That argument makes me so pissed. Like it actually makes me. But I appreciate you for that. Actually,
like, and it because it falls apart so easy. Like, if I can understand science and I can understand reality, like you and I, without needing to understand God, and logic is also a part of that objective reality.
true.
Then I can clearly ground, just like I can ground science without needing God, I can ground logic without needing knowledge of God. Like that's
Yeah, that is true. Yep, exactly. And I mean, tag like actually gave me existential like crisis because of how, like, Darth Vader or something. What was his name again?
From Star Wars, Darth Vader.
No, like the actual debater, he's
Darth
Dawkins
Dawkins
or something. Yeah.
I
Oh my
actually did
god!
see
And
him
I've
pop
seen
up
his arguments
and see the. I did see a notification that he came across the live. I don't know if he's still in the chat or not.
Oh, he's here? Oh my no way. I don't think so, but yeah, he's a ultimate rage baiter when it comes to tag. All right. So actually, you know what?
I did run into someone that tried to run tag in front of me, and I was holding his feet to the fire and eventually got him to admit that the whole purpose of tag is not to prove that God exists, but to get the interlocutor to admit that they don't know. Therefore, the theists can now claim victory because they say, well, I do know, which is disingenuous. So as long as you understand that the whole purpose of the tag argument is just to get you to admit that you don't know something, it loses a lot of its power.
Yeah, it's just bad.
Yes.
All right. So from what I'm hearing, I don't fully understand your definition of the divine simplicity. From what, like, when I talk to other people, they just say, omnipotence is just equals to omniscience, and it is just equals to love and justice. And I find that like logically not possible.
Yeah, and you will find that interpretation among some Thomists. I'm not sure which one, like whether mine or the one you described, is more popular amongst Thomists. But mine isn't the quote unquote correct interpretation of divine simplicity. It's just my understanding of divine simplicity. But the one that you described is one that's out there, held by people who know Thomas Aquinas as well, if not better than me. But I also know that the one that I hold is also held by Thomas, who know Thomas Aquinas as well, if not better than me. And it's the one that I find a lot more logical and understandable.
Yeah, I mean yours kind of sounds like I don't fully understand it, so I can't say anything about it. But do you have like a resource where I can check out like like fully about your definition of the divine simplicity?
Um, hmm. The thing is that that's almost like asking someone, "Hey, I don't know a whole lot about physics. What's a good book about quantum mechanics?"
Okay.
Like because it is like one of the most theologically dense works out there. What I would recommend if you want an idea, at least for a background on like at least Thomistic thought, there's a book by Peter Kreeft called The Summa of the Summa. So the Summa Theologica, as I'm sure you know, is this huge tome of like 4 different volumes. Peter Kreeft takes all of that and basically condenses it into one book, of like the major things that one should know as a Catholic who's interested in Thomistic theology. This is not going to prove God or prove Catholicism, but it's at least going to give you an idea on the background.
Okay. All right. If you're down for it, if you don't want like you want to put someone else, or can I ask one more question?
Yeah, you can ask another question.
Okay. So the other thing, I think you mentioned PSR too
Mhm.
earlier, like when you were presenting your argument. Do you hold to the PSR or like the weak PSR, or what do you hold to?
I need to look deeper into it because I thought I had an understanding of it, and then when Dr. Blitz was bringing up the brute contingency, it helped me realize that I misunderstood it. And so I need to relook at PSR. But as I understand it, I hold to at least weak PSR. I definitely don't hold to strong PSR because I think strong PSR claims that basically everything requires an external explanation. And I do believe that there are some things that have an internal explanation, as in like they don't have an external one, but they explain themselves.
Aren't those just necessary things?
Yes. So like I do believe that necessary things exist. But I think, like I said, I need to double check and relook at it. But strong PSR, in my
I
understanding,
thought. Okay, wait. I thought weak PSR allowed for some type of brute fact or brute
Mhm.
contingent thing, right?
Yeah. So weak PSR allows for brute contingent facts, which is different than a necessary thing.
Yeah.
I don't think brute contingent facts exist, but I also don't think that everything requires an external explanation. And like I said, I need to relook into it because it is my current understanding, and I could be wrong. Like I said, I need to relook into it. The It is my understanding that strong PSR states that everything has an external explanation and nothing can be its own explanation. So I'm in this weird situation where I deny the existence of brute contingencies, but I also acknowledge that there are things that have explanations for themselves that aren't explained by an external factor.
Okay. So I think what you got wrong is strong PSR. Also, I think they have necessary and contingent things. They just, I think, yeah, they do have necessary things, and the difference between weak and strong is just, and the strong it terminates on the necessary thing, and then like on weak, they hold to like they're like for like proof facts. I think that's my understanding of it.
Yeah, like I said, I need to double check because, Dr. Blades helped me realize that I didn't understand it as well as I thought. So I just need to look into it.
All right. Okay then, bro. Thank you.
Absolutely. Glad finally had a chance to talk with you. I know last week you tried to join, but it was like right at the end
Yeah,
of stuff.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You have a good one.
You too.
All right. Let's see. Got Machine Elf.
Hello.
Hello, how's it going?
I'm good. I'm good. So I would love for an argument for God to succeed, but usually what goes on here is that you can get like a good stage one, stage two, maybe, or somewhere when you start arguing, oh, it's this particular religion's God, then it's like it doesn't tend to fall through there. Like my difficulty is even if your argument succeeds, does it demonstrate that necessary thing that grounds everything else or causes everything else? Does it have a mind or intention or awareness or any of the things people associate with God?
Yeah. And so that touches a little bit on the divine simplicity. So like I was saying, is that Thomas Aquinas would say that like it might appear to us as a mind, but he doesn't literally have a mind in the way that we would think of human minds. But I do agree with you that like I was speaking with another person who's very interested in this type of conversation, and it's called the gap problem. Not necessarily the God of the gaps, but just like the gap problem. As you pointed out, a lot of people would be able to grant, there exists at least one independent thing, something that exists on its own, not dependent on anything else in order for it to exist. And from there, we're able to. What ends up happening is there's a gap between trying to show the independent thing to God, even as a philosophical God. There's a bit of a struggle there, and I think part of the reason is both sides are committing the same mistake. We've established, hey, there's this independent thing. Theists want to say, and that independent thing is God. Whereas the non-theist is going to say, well, that independent thing is the universe. But no one is taking the time, or at least not a lot of people are taking the time to sit down and say, well, what enables a thing to be independent? And the argument that I'm working on is trying to explore that question to then help finally build that symmetry breaker to determine whether it is the universe or something else.
Okay, well, it's definitely going to be the universe either way, in my understanding. It's just, is the universe God, essentially, would be I think, the resolution of that, right?
So, well, that's what the question is. It's like, so it would also depend on how you understand the universe. So, like, in the argument that I'm working on, the conclusion is that I get to, and like I said, I need to figure out, like, the argument works if priority monism is not the case, and if some form of PSR is the case, where you can't have brute contingent facts. But if my third premise in my argument is true, then that means that there is something whose identity is existence itself. That is not the universe. The universe is the set of all things that exist, but that's not the same as existence itself. It's kind of like saying,
yeah, I
hey,
got you. But wouldn't the universe be just an extension of the thing you're talking about, though, right? Like, where would the universe come from if not just caused directly by the other thing that is defining existence?
By the universe, are you talking about the space-time continuum, or are you speaking of all of reality of all things that exist?
Literally anything, right? Because if this is the thing that defines existence, then all existence comes from it defining it, like its authority over existence, right? So if bubble universes, they would be also defined by it. Multiple realities or timelines would have to be defined by it.
Yeah, so, but that's still contained within that space-time continuum.
Right, but that's with our epistemic access. Like, if we're talking about something that is only fundamental to our universe, but there's a broader reality that is disconnected from it, then you got polytheism at least, or multiple realities that are not connected. How do we know they're even real if they're not connected? But I would agree that what we're trying to dig to here is what is the fundamental thing or structure or even lack of structure that defines what things will actually exist in any reality or universe.
So, for this, and like I said, like I was telling one of the other guests, I don't know if you were there for that. I do have like the full argument listed out on my profile. It's in a pinned video, and I also did an appearance on Unapologetic. Unfortunately, Ian wasn't able to be there when they finally let me up, but I did talk with Justin and Dr. Blitz on it, and Dr. Blitz pointed to a couple of issues he saw with it. But if for the sake of conversation, because from the sounds of it, you're like, hey, even if we get to this foundational thing, how do we get to a particular deity? If you're willing for the sake of conversation to grant the conclusion of the argument, I can show at least my what I'm hoping to accomplish and the roadmap that I have in mind to accomplish that. Like, it's still something that I'm working on. But that sounds like mostly what you're curious on is like, okay, how do we get from God to a particular religion? Is that
So
correct?
we can do this all kinds of ways. I'm willing to explore any avenue, because to do this, you just have to say, what is it you're trying to establish that we're calling God, right? What is that set of properties or lack of properties or whatever you're saying? And then even then, people might disagree we should call it God, but you'd have to motivate why one of those properties is a thing that people associate with God. Yeah. So whatever that is, right?
So in philosophy, which is the realm that we're currently in this question, God is just understood to be, it's basically Spinoza's God, the ultimate grounding of all of reality, from which, yeah.
So, well, this is the thing, right? Because I also believe that such a thing makes the most sense to exist in some capacity. I don't know how you could explain reality any other way at the end of the day. You'd have to abandon the PSR. I agree with that. So the situation, though, is like that could still be true, and there's Spinoza's God is real, and it might not be aware that it's even real. It might not even have self-awareness per se.
So, okay, then yeah. So it sounds like you and I are at least close enough where I can say, hey, this is what I understand the ultimate grounding of reality to be. And then the question then becomes, does this ultimate grounding of reality actually interact with its creation in some way? And if so, do we have evidence of it? And the route
I think it necessarily does. That's actually not even the interesting question. Is it doing it with intention as an agent like us? And not even like necessarily a human mind, just that it's choosing between different states through a course of time, right? Which I don't think it could. I don't think that would make sense. But awareness doesn't have to work that way. This is just the difficult thing. Like, what does it mean to be aware and to make choices?
So the way that I get to it is, so we have this independent thing. And my understanding of it is, in order for this thing to be independent, it would be a contradiction of what it is to claim that it doesn't exist. And the only type of thing where that can be true is where its existence is its identity. So this philosophical idea started to, like, you can see the very basic foundation starting with Aristotle in what he called the thought thinking itself. And then it took like 1,500 years from Aristotle to Thomas Aquinas. Now, you did have people like Moses Maimonides and Avicenna who were talking about God as pure being, but it wasn't until like Thomas Aquinas where you got it formalized in the way that we understand it today of God as being, or God whose essence is its own existence. So it took humanity 1,500 years to come up with that. But about 200 to 300 years before Aristotle and Plato, and even before Alexander the Great spread Greek thought to the rest of the known world, you had the Jewish people write about the identity of their God, and the identity they gave to their God was, I am that I am. Now, in this culture, the name of a god was its identity, what Thomas Aquinas would call the essence. So God is revealing his essence to the Jewish people as I am, which is the first person form of the verb to be, or being, which Aquinas equates to existence. So from there, we get God is revealing himself as existence itself. Now, I know people will point to, oh, that, that's a coincidence and things like that, and that's fine. Like, I'm not trying to sit here and say, oh, this obviously, demonstratably, beyond a shadow of a doubt, proves that this God interacted with reality. But to me, in the philosophical background that I have and the way that I understand philosophy and the way that this philosophical thought processed, it is as anachronistic to discover that in that time period as it would be to go to the ruins of Pompeii and find writings of an atomic bomb.
Yeah, this is all well and good, but to me, this just means that reality is just what God is doing or thinking, right? Like we're just in the mind of God, or we are just an outpouring of God's nature. So, like, I really think that the confusion here is people somehow think that God has his own perspective or its own perspective and can do miracles and put magical visions and info in people's minds, when what really might be just going on is that you and me are just thoughts in God's mind, which are limited in what we know in order to exist at all as what we are. And so I don't think there's any magic or miracles, even with this conclusion that you have and that, the Thomists had and everything. It's like, yeah, like if that is what God is, it's a Spinoza God. It's not a doing miracles God necessarily yet.
Yeah. And I would agree that like miracles don't violate the laws of nature. They don't violate the laws of physics. They might be things beyond what we are able to do.
Right. There might be science we don't know yet. That's what I would interpret it to as well.
Yeah. But yeah, so it sounds like then we agree on a lot of different things. It just then comes down to semantics at this point.
Well, the semantics are really just clearing up what people really mean. Like if we both agree that existence itself defines everything that happens, and so yes, we would be a mind within existence. We would be like existence thinking about itself from a limited reference frame. The question though is like, is there like a universal reference frame such that everything is put in its proper place for some grander picture? And I think the grander picture is there, but the only one I can logically justify is just one based off of consistency. Like for this thing that defines existence to do anything, the only thing it would do is just maximize existence that doesn't contradict or interfere with other things that exist. It would be maximally consistent. So like, yeah, like, I don't know. That's, I think, the closest I've gotten, but no atheist is going to be like, oh, okay, well then that means that the church is correct or this church or this.
And I'm not expecting that at all. In fact, I used to have like belief in God is rational. I am a Catholic Christian believer. If you disagree with the prompt, call in. But so many people wanted to attack the Catholic Christian thing. And I'm like, no, I'm just curious about the God question. I did that as a way to introduce myself. So today was my first day trying to take it down, see if that helps guide the conversation in the way that I want. And so far it seems to be working. But I agree 100% that just because like I'm able to show Spinoza's God, it doesn't prove anything about Catholicism at all. I agree 100% on that.
So I think this is good though, because what isn't the key here that you were told, I think by Blitz or someone, we need to firmly show that the PSR has to be true, not necessarily the version that you don't think is true. I mean, could you clarify what a brute contingency is? I'll figure out, because I've looked into structures that'll be related to it. I just don't know the vocab.
Yeah, so a brute contingency is something that doesn't have an explanation for why it is that it is, or even that it is. It just is, and there's no explanation even within itself. It just is.
Well, I'm curious what you think about this, because I think that just leads to ontological explosion. Like if something can happen for no reason at all, then anything can happen for no reason at all. It's absurd. And then that would just collapse mathematically back into distinct things that are not impossible, being the things that are real. So I can discard that. But I think there is a type of thing that we have to face. It is possible for there to be determining laws from existence itself that forces a random die roll because of other determined forces coming together and forcing. I think that's what wave function collapse is that there's a law that says, oh, now it's got to be quantized, and there's laws that say it's more likely to be here than there, but there's no law to say it's got to be there over here outside those probabilities, but it does have to be quantized. So it's determined to be random. And that's the only type of quote unquote indeterminism I can actually make work without collapsing into absurdity.
Yeah, and like I said, I want to look into it because like I like going up against as strong of a version as possible, and I feel like, hey, let me go to the people that actually hold to this, because like you said, it seems like it collapses into ontological absurdity. I agree with you 100% there, but I'm also confident that these people are smart enough where that argument has been presented to them and they have an answer to it. So I'm curious to see how they answer it.
That's what I need. That's what we need to find out. Because I also, for my own work, I really need to I've posted my own attempted defenses of the PSR, and I've done at least like 5 or 6 that I think are good, but no one's rebutted them very sufficiently. But no one's really, like, not many people are convinced by it either. That's the issue, right? Like, how do we make this really clear? The PSR really does have to be true in some capacity. Like, at least you can't have complete brute random things that have no cause whatsoever happening.
And what I understand what weak PSR is, in its strongest form, is it's effectively saying, hey, we're trying to avoid the black swan fallacy. We observe almost everything having an explanation, but we don't know if that is universally the case. Maybe there's at least one thing that just so happened and everything else does have explanation because of that. But that's like I said, that's like my steelman of weak PSR. Where it's them basically saying, hey, we're just trying to make sure we avoid the black swan fallacy.
Well, I think what needs to be done here, right, is to show, and I think I've attempted to do this, and I'd love for you to work on this, to think we're about to come to a close on this convo, but what we need to do with the PSR is show that if you do allow anything to be caused in a particular way that has no explanation at all, no cause, it spawned itself from nothing or what have you, then there's no mathematical reason for anything to have that restriction, right? Anything should equally be possible to happen at any time, because there's no law saying this particular thing can happen for no cause, but not this other thing. You at least need that. You at least need a law that says some things can just happen for no reason, and which particular things can happen for no reason. Otherwise, reality should not exist at all. Like, there should be no thing that is privileged over other things happening. So yeah, putting that in some kind of formal argument that convinces people, I think that should do it.
Yep. But yeah, no, so it sounds like you and I are in agreement on a lot of different things, which is actually what the purpose of this live is to show that, hey, we agree than what most people will say, or what most people think.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just like, I do think, though, that if you do this, if we all succeed and there is a God, like, it's not going to be the God they thought 2,000 years ago, right? The anthropomorphic, oh, he's angry and causes a flood because he messed up and stuff like that, right? That's all kind of just, like, you're not thinking that's all going to be literally true, right?
No. And even in the Catholic faith, they say that, no, that's analogical language.
Yeah. It's a perfect allegory for catastrophism and how evolution works. That really, the Noah flood story. Like, if it's not literal, it actually matches science.
But yeah.
All right, man. Take care.
Yeah, you have a good one. It was great having you up here. All right, let's see. I think someone cool was up next. Well, doesn't look like he's still here. Let's see if JoJo's still here. Nope. Let's see. What about Laughbow? Nope. I wish TikTok would let you know that the person left.
What's up, brother?
What's up? How's it going?
It's going pretty good, man. How's your day going?
Going all right. What brings you up here today?
I ran into your live probably about 20 minutes ago. Sent the request up. And I'm back now, I guess. Belief in God is rational. Let's start with your prompt. Do you want me to go, or do you want to tell me why you believe that?
No, go ahead. I can't answer a concern if I don't know what the concern is.
Right. What's rational about, the belief in God, or what's rational about God? How is God rational?
So, first of all, rational. Are you familiar with the distinction between a valid argument and a sound argument?
I think so.
Okay.
I would think so.
Okay, so you're aware then that for a valid argument, it just means that the conclusion is justified, or at least follows from the premises, and no logical fallacies have been committed, but we don't know if the premise or if the conclusion is true or not, because we don't know if the premises are true or not. Correct?
Gotcha. Okay. Oh, I know.
So from there, if you accept each of the premises, even if we don't know that the premises are true, then you ought to accept the conclusion of a rational argument. My favorite example is in science, we have no idea if the universe has a finite amount of time where it has a temporal beginning or a temporal first moment, or if there's an infinite past. We don't know. There's no way to prove one way or the other because all of our abilities to measure stop at Planck time, and we can't go beyond that. And we don't know if there is more time on the other side of it or if there's nothing on the other side of it. And from there, you have different scientists who will put forth justifications for their position, whether they think there is a temporal first moment or if there's an infinite eternal past. And both can't be true, but they're acting rationally because they are operating on premises that they have reason to believe in. And it is my position that not that everyone who believes in God is acting rationally, but that the God belief can be a rational one if operating from premises that one accepts. It then will lead one to a conclusion, or can lead one to a conclusion of a God. Now, as far as like what specifically am I talking about for the kind of God, I'm trying to keep it strictly to the philosophical conversation at this point in time, not get into like, oh, it is the Abrahamic God that incarnated in Jesus Christ, who was crucified, died, and was risen. I am just keeping it strictly to the philosophical understanding.
Okay, well, if you keep it like to the philosophical, no point. I can't really argue with that, because I would say it's rational, but I would say that when you look out to the world, it doesn't produce that rational side of things. The world is kind of like in a very destructive state, and you would think religion would make the world better, but to me, ever since the Bible's been out, religion's been on earth, it's been nothing but hell and chaos, So that's why I'd have reason to believe that it's not rational. But I could see how it could be rational, but it's just,
Well, and like I said, that's getting into the question of like, if there is a God, do any of these religions accurately follow this God? And it could be the case where there is a God and none of the religions follow him. That absolutely could be a case. But I'm mostly interested in the conversation as far as like, there are individuals out there who will say, hey, if you believe in God, it doesn't matter what your justification is, even if it's just the Spinoza God, you're acting irrationally.
okay. I see. Well, yeah, man, I can't really argue against that. So, you have your own. It's not really an argument, but, I can understand where you're coming from. So definitely. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Nah, not at all, man. Thanks for having me up. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. You have a good one.
Dialogue. You too, brother.
Let's see. What's up, Jay?
Hello, you hear me?
How's it going?
It's going all right, thank you. I would like to attempt to run a syllogism, or a similar version of a syllogism that I heard Ian give. It's his.
Probably have already heard it if Ian.
I imagine you have Yes, I imagine you have already heard it. This is more for like, my sake as I
Yeah,
don't know, I would like to be able to run it good myself rather than
yeah,
just hear someone else run it. If is that all right?
yeah. No, go ahead.
Okay, cool. This is the argument to a relationship with humans.
Okay.
And so there's sort of three horns to it, depending on what you believe,
Hmm.
or how, whether you believe that God wants a relationship with humans.
Hmm.
Um, so the first horn, or actually, so I guess premise one would be, if God exists, it is both in our best interest and desirable to have a relationship with it. That is one assumption I'm making. Um,
It's in
and
our best interest to have a relationship.
it is both in our best interest and desirable to have a relationship with it.
Okay.
Um, and then premise two would be, it is irrational. Again, I made this specifically to your prompt here. So premise two would be, it is irrational to believe in a God that is either not rational or not omnipotent. And of course, the point of this is I'm trying to prove that God is either not rational or not omnipotent.
Yeah.
Um, so okay, then let's see. Three, if God wants a relationship with all humans, or actually, I guess premise three would be, if you do believe that God wants a relationship with all humans, um, then God has a reason to achieve a relationship with all humans. If God has a goal, God is rational and God is omnipotent, then God achieves that goal. If God wants a relationship with all humans, then God achieves a relationship.
Because
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
typing this out so that way I can follow along.
Oh,
So
sorry. Yeah, yeah,
you're
yeah.
good. If God wants a relationship with all humans, um, so what's the
Yeah, if God wants a relationship with all humans, then and God is rational,
okay?
then God has a reason to achieve a relationship with all humans.
Then God has a reason to achieve that relationship with all humans. Okay.
Okay, and then after that, actually, which premise is that? That was premise three, and then four would be, if God has a goal, God is rational and God is omnipotent, then God achieves that goal.
If God has a goal, then due to him being rational and omnipotent, he will achieve that goal.
Hmm. And then five follows from three and four. God has the goal of having a relationship with all humans. God is rational and God is omnipotent. Therefore, God achieves a relationship with all humans.
So P5 basically, it follows that God
Yeah.
ought to have a relationship with all humans.
Well, not only ought, but well, yeah, ought. Yeah, you're right.
Because the argument is going to be we observe that God does not.
Yes. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. The argument is God does not have a relationship with all humans. Therefore, God is either not rational or not omnipotent. Conclusion: it is therefore irrational to worship this God.
Okay. That it follows that God ought to have a relationship with all humans. P6, God does not have a relationship with all humans. Therefore, conclusion, this God is either not rational or not omnipotent.
Yeah.
All right. So the only thing that I would say is, like, as it stands, at least as far as the prompt is concerned, because
Yeah.
there are understandings of gods that aren't omnipotent. Now,
Okay. Sure.
I think those will fall apart in other areas and other capacities, and it also depends on how one defines omnipotent. But, like, for example, I just want to point that out there. So if you can find a way to make it where the rational part is the stronger one,
Is the only one. Gotcha. Okay.
yeah, it will be a little bit stronger for a prompt like this.
Gotcha.
But No, so like as far as I can tell, the argument is at least valid. What I will say though is there are going to be individuals such as myself who will put forth arguments as to how God is achieving a relationship with all humans, even if the individual doesn't necessarily know that they're in that relationship. Thomas Aquinas and the Catholic Church call it implicit faith and implicit belief.
Okay.
The justification for that is Jesus Christ identifies himself as the way, the truth, and the life. If it is true that Jesus is true, then by the transitive property, where if you as an individual are searching truth, and Jesus is truth, then in reality you're searching Jesus even if you don't know that you're searching Jesus, and because of that relationship, you are actually in a relationship with God, even if you're not fully aware of that relationship. And then the question then becomes, well, why doesn't God make it clear? And
Right.
there is an argument that I saw. I did not like the way the author put it because it came off as kind of uncharitable, but I understood what he was trying to say. But basically, let's say there's an individual who, because of the way that he grew up, has a very high libido and will struggle with the requirements of sexual morality within the Catholic faith.
Okay.
And so God permits him to live in this state of invincible ignorance where, through no fault of their own, they don't accept the truth of the Catholic faith. Because of the way that sin works, he's not culpable for any acts he does against the sexual moral code of the Catholic Church. That way then,
Okay.
by the time that he passes away and sees God, he's still in this situation where he desires truth and isn't in conflict with his libido. Now, after death and he's in the afterlife, that libido is no longer a problem, it's no longer standing in the way, and he is, through his ignorance, able to be in a situation where he can look at God and say, oh, you were the truth that I was searching for. And so an argument could be made in that situation. Will this argument work against 90% of theists that you run across? Sure. But just know that there is that theological idea that God permits people to remain in ignorance in order for them to have that relationship with him.
I see. Okay.
But if the argument is that granted, that is because the Catholic faith holds that one is able to go to heaven while not being Catholic. That's why we're able to make this argument. But for most evangelical Protestants who say that you have to belong to Christianity, bare minimum, if not their specific branch of Christianity,
right.
That's when this argument becomes very compelling.
And does this argument make the assumption that people of other religions are like actually somehow worshiping the Catholic God, even if they think it's some, Vishnu or whatever? Is that sort of the idea?
For the one that I presented, kind of. It actually comes from St. Paul when he's talking about the altar to the unknown God. And I also like the way that Bishop Fulton J. Sheen puts it. All religions have a portion of truth, whether it's the Catholic faith that has the fullness of truth, or a religion that was created yesterday in Las Vegas, where it only has 0.0001% of the truth.
Okay, so interesting. Actually, I do want to get back to my argument, but actually, I'm curious about this. So, would a problem for this type of argument not be that I'm under first of all, I'm not a biblical scholar, so I don't know the Bible very well, but from what I know, like worshiping false idols, or for that matter any other sin, is still punishable. But this argument says that, well, you actually could sin, right? With your individual with high libido example, you actually could sin, and God would just say, oh, that's fine, I will keep you in ignorance until the date of your death. So
Well, and
how
that's
is
because
sin
the way that
possible?
yeah, so that's because the way that the Catholic Church defines and understands sin.
Oh, okay.
So there's and even I think it's Saint or in the book of it's in First John. And the reason why I had this already pulled up is because I'm working on something for Justin from Deconstruction Zone, and this passage came up in my research. If anyone sees his brother committing a sin that is not a deadly sin, the Catholic Church calls this a venial sin, he will ask, and God will give him life for those whose sin is not deadly. There is sin which is deadly, and some translations say there is sin which is mortal. And so that's where the Catholic Church gets the terminology of venial and mortal sins. But the mortal sin is the one that will send someone to hell, not venial sin. And so that's the one that I'm going to focus on for this specific example.
Okay.
So in order for a sin to be mortal, it needs to have 3 properties. The first property is that it needs to be grave matter. And there's some lists that are out there. Mostly it's just basically don't break the 10 commandments. But the church does not have an exhaustive list of everything that is grave.
Okay.
But, that the sin is grave matter. The second one is that you need to know that it's grave matter. And by knowledge here, and again, the church hasn't officially defined it, but to me it seems to require more than just knowing that the church says it's wrong. Because the language is knowledge that it is grave. So you need to know that it's grave. If you don't know that it's grave, and because belief is a prerequisite for knowledge,
Right.
if you don't believe it's grave, then do you have knowledge? Now, that also gets into the question of whether one truly is in invincible ignorance, or if they're in what's called vincible ignorance, where they did have the capability to get themselves out of it, and they knew they could get themselves out of it, but they intentionally remained in ignorance. But that's a whole other conversation.
Okay, sure.
But and then the last one is that they did it without coercion. And again, the church hasn't defined on where that line is drawn, but the example I like to use is, let's say someone takes an addictive substance.
Sure.
That first time might be a mortal sin. But now that they're addicted, they are no longer free of coercion, and those subsequent usages, as long as they are making a sincere effort to try to stop, any subsequent use is not a mortal sin because
under the influence of it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
So by that, if any of those 3, even just one, is not present, then it's not a mortal sin. The person is still doing grave matter, but they're not culpable of sin. So for that person with the high libido that I was talking about, because of the fact that he was in ignorance, but was still acting to the best of his knowledge, that's not a sin anymore for him. And we even have this, I believe, in Paul's letter to the Romans. He talks about the Gentiles being a law unto themselves. And that's the type of situation that I'm talking about here, where they are following the law to the best of their ability, even if it's not the perfect law of God. And they'll be held accountable to what they did know and what they could know.
Gotcha. And so let me just try and get this understanding. The idea is that, or the idea specifically following from my original argument is that individuals actually do have a relationship with God, or are allowed to have a relationship with God, in the afterlife. And the way that is achieved is by, saying that whatever, their actions were not, or so their actions were not sinful in life because they remained in ignorance, and therefore in the afterlife they're able to realize that the truth they're searching was God in hindsight.
Effectively, yeah.
Okay, and does the idea that the whatever, if you are searching truth at all, you are automatically searching, you're automatically searching for God. Does that follow from divine simplicity, that God is truth? I'm assuming.
Not quite. it's not really like a divine simplicity. It's more of let me put it to you like this. So you do desire truth, and you're trying to make sure that you believe true things, right?
Sure.
So if it came out that um or just to make this example a little bit more poignant, name something that you currently believe is true that if it turns out was false would have an extreme impact on your life. Like it could be anything, even if it's like dietary.
I guess like my name. I don't know if my name was something else or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So you then discover. Let me up the ante. You discover that you were swapped at birth, right?
Sure.
In the hospital. Now that doesn't mean that like your relationship with the people that raised you is any less true or anything else like that. But now that you know the truth, you, depending on what your goal is of like, hey, I want to have a relationship with my family, you are now either going to reinvent or reinterpret what it means for someone to be family, or say, hey, I still love you and I still appreciate you for raising me, but I want to know my history. I want to know who my family is. And you're going to go and find that, right? Because of your desire for truth.
Okay, so a life changing, you have a life changing realization, and because of that, there is necessarily some additional truth that you now want to seek. Okay.
Yep. And so that is an example of someone who's searching for truth versus someone who claims that they're searching for truth, but really they're searching for comfort, who told, hey, there was an error in the hospital records. You were given to the wrong family, and you just go, so, like that revelation doesn't bother you. Now, I'm not saying that person necessarily is wrong. We're just using this as an example to try to get to what I'm getting at. So, it could be the case. I hope it's not, but it could be the case that there are individuals who claim that they're searching for truth, but really what they're looking for is justifications for their way of living.
I mean, I would argue that that's how humans function.
I mean, yeah, like there is a strong argument for that, but there are people who are looking for justifications for the way that they're living, or at least it appears to be that way, but in reality, they're searching for truth because they believe they've arrived at it. Like, for example, I am working on a book that's trying to show why from, hey, belief in God all the way to Catholicism and the rational process to that, because I believe that is the truth. Now, there are people out there who will say, oh, you're just trying to provide justification for your already made conclusion, and maybe that's the case. But I do believe that I'm making a sincere effort in following truth to the best of my ability. But the point that I'm making is that is a disposition of the heart that we cannot know until Judgment Day, essentially.
Okay. So I think the part that I don't quite believe follows here is that searching for what is true presupposes effectively that you therefore must be searching for God, right? Because sure, you can make an argument that some people aren't actually searching for truth; they're only searching for comfort or whatever. But if this unknowable thing about your disposition that you are in fact searching for truth, this means that God actually already has a relationship with you. I don't take an unknowable, like this unknowable relationship to be the kind of relationship that God would want, right? Because in my first premise, my first premise, if God exists, it is both in our best interest and desirable to have a relationship with it, right? Yeah. That I might have to add the additional caveat that like this relationship must indeed be known to you and provide those benefits. Because if you don't know about this relationship, it cannot provide those benefits to you.
So the argument, that's why I was saying, is like it's going to depend on who you're talking to.
Okay,
most evangelical Christians are going to say that you need to have that relationship here on earth in order to have it in heaven. The Catholic Church is going to say God desires a relationship with us not necessarily here on Earth, although, you know, that's good. But ultimately, what he desires is a relationship with us for eternity in the afterlife.
Oh, okay.
So if that's his goal, he's going to do everything he can to make sure that as many people, if not everyone, get to eternity with him in the afterlife.
I see. Okay.
So that's the
Um,
subtle difference between
mm,
those two positions. The evangelical Christian is going to be arguing that that relationship and that or that relationship needs to be made visible and present here on earth, versus the Catholic position, which is just no, it doesn't have to necessarily be made visible on earth, but
mhm.
it's easier to achieve it in the afterlife if it's visible here on earth, but it doesn't have to be visible here on earth.
Doesn't have to be visible on Earth. Gotcha. I see. Okay. So if I specifically wanted to put this, I have this argument against a Catholic, which you are, I
Mhm.
assume, and what I would have to do is I'd have to figure out a way to. No, actually, no, I don't think the argument works, right? Because if the relationship does not need to be evident on Earth, then effectively
We don't know.
no evidence. Yeah, no, you're right. No, effectively no evidence could be against the idea that God wants a relationship, right? Because if nothing that happens on Earth affects whether God wants a relationship at all,
Or
it
at
can
least
happen in
it's
the
not an
afterlife, then it's fine.
indicator of their
At
final.
least it's not an indicator. Yeah, no, you're right. Okay. Now, okay, I can make this. This isn't part of the original argument, but I can just off the top of my head, I'm seeing like, okay, if a relationship does actually okay, this is just a question about the Catholic faith then. Does a relationship with God in the afterlife,
Mhm.
presumably, does this require the individual to of in some way, have free will to freely accept this relationship, or is this relationship assumed to be obtained regardless of the individual's disposition? Like, is it possible for an individual to be in the afterlife without a relationship?
Yes. Now, in the Catholic faith, you have what's called the hope for an empty hell, which is what I hold to. It
Yeah.
is a little bit of a controversial position, but it has been expressed by Pope Francis, and you can find support for it in uh, readings from Thomas Aquinas and Saint Augustine.
Mhm.
So it is within the tradition of the church, and you even have prayers of the church talking about this hope for an empty hell. And you can't have hope
Gotcha.
for something that's impossible. But
Right.
regardless, the fact of the matter is that it is a real reality that people can reject God. If you want, and I know people don't have, especially non-believers, don't like C.S. Lewis because of a lot of the stuff that he put in, especially Mere Christianity. They feel like it's just overly simplistic, wishy-washy stuff, and he wasn't trying to be this rigorous philosophical guru. But if you want a good idea on like how I understand like this approach, so to speak, is in his work called The Great Divorce, where he kind of describes that relationship and how one can live a life. Like he even describes how this murderer came to the realization, basically, oh, I was in the wrong, while his boss, who lived a good life, because it wasn't the afterlife wasn't what the boss wanted it to be and what isn't what he expected it to be. The boss is the one that rejects God and walks away into hell, while the murderer is the one that walks into heaven.
Okay.
So that, I think, it was very formative for me in my understanding of this relationship aspect of heaven and hell. But yes, it is a free choice. And it is something that is made with, at that point, the full informed decision of the individual.
Okay.
The way I like to describe it is it's not, the particular judgment is not God judging us. It's us judging God and determining if he's deserving of our worship or not.
Sure. That makes sense to me. The issue I think I have is that it seems evident to me, and again, I don't have an argument for this, it seems evident to me that a relationship requires a free choice. You are claiming it is a free choice.
Hmm.
However, it seems evident that the threat of hell makes this a very coercive choice, right?
So yeah, and
Like,
that's going to be getting into whether or not hell is a place or not, and the understanding of hell. I really like the way that Bishop described it. He describes it like, if God is omnipresent, that means that he's everywhere, and you can never be outside of the presence of God.
okay,
Now, what if someone rejects God, right? But they're still,
okay, yeah,
but they're still in that presence because they can't be outside of it, and because they reject God and they want to put themselves as whatever it is, and they reject what God is,
mhm,
that presence, instead of being a source of joy for them, is now a source of pain. Kind of like two people can be in the same room with a person, and because of the good relationship that two of them have, that's a pleasant experience. Whereas because of the bad relationship two of them have, it's an unpleasant experience, but it's the same event, it's the same person that they're having that relationship with, but it's determined by the internal disposition by the individual. So it's not in the sense of like a coercive choice of God threatening the individual, like, you better believe me or I'm going to be doing terrible things to you. It's the individual is almost, quote unquote, self-inflicting it on them. And I know that sounds almost like blaming the victim, but it's what I'm trying to get at is, you know, take the Christopher Hitchens and Mother Teresa situation. You have people who say, no, Mother Teresa was this really devoted, pleasant, holy woman, and you have someone like Christopher Hitchens who's doing all of these horrible claims about her, and making these statements about her, but that's because of his internal disposition to her. Both people have people are having the same experience or are encountering the same person, but because of the disposition of the individual, it flavors or dictates the quality or the attributes of that relationship.
gotcha. Now, this idea of a self-inflicted pain for rejecting God implies that God could not relieve that pain. This seems to me conflicts with omnipotence, right?
Omnipotence is about is often described as what's logically possible, and that is going to get into.
Oh, it's an argument not logically possible to, because this pain is self-inflicted. The argument, if I understand it, is that the pain of hell is a result of the circumstances that you've put yourself in, as opposed to something that is imposed on you.
Yeah. And like the way that I just think of it is like, I do agree, and I love Bishop Barron's vision of it. But the way that I understood it before I heard this is, if God is pure existence and God is the grounding of all existence, and you reject God, then what the person who's in hell is claiming is, I reject you as the grounding of my existence. I am my own reason for existing. But that's not true. So they're trying to separate themselves from the very thing that gives them the ability to exist, while trying to still exist, which is a contradiction, which is something that can't be the case. And that contradiction, that living in that state of contradiction, is that pain.
Gotcha. I understand. Okay. Okay. So if I'm starting to realize that the initial syllogism I put out just makes a couple. First, the assumption that you identified, which is an assumption of omniscience, or sorry, omnipotence, which isn't always assumed under various.
It's depending on how it's defined is more of the issue, but yes.
Depending on how it's defined. Okay, gotcha. And then after that, we have the issue of a relationship with God being effectively inevitable, like you have it regardless, or in the Catholic viewpoint, the relationship God occurring, not needing to occur on earth. It could occur in heaven.
Mhm.
And then that the relationship or the relationship is still a free choice because going to hell is not coercive, which makes it not a threat, which you still have a free choice of whether to accept. Okay, gotcha. So if I want to, I don't know, it doesn't feel like this argument really could be strengthened given that the assumption is that God wants a relationship with humans. I had the other horns out of either God wants a relationship with all humans, God wants a relationship with some humans but not all, therefore he's unfair,
Mhm.
or God wants a relationship with no humans, in which case it's clear that God doesn't have our best interest in mind. Those were the three horns
Yeah.
that I was trying to construct. So it sounds like I need to effectively create another one that doesn't assume omnipotence or tries to show that the relationship, I don't know, for example, ought to be obtained on earth or something, effectively
Yeah.
going against the Catholic. Yeah.
If
Okay.
if you want, the route that I would go if I was you, don't
Yeah.
even worry about the human question, because like
Oh, okay.
especially for the Catholic Church, like because if you're trying to attack all of Christianity, as you saw, the
Right.
Catholic
Right.
Church has this different perspective on it, and even permits the hope for an empty hell. And I have the hope that God didn't create anyone that is going to go to hell
Sure.
for a
Reasonable. Yeah.
human being. But there is something that all of Christian denominations do hold to, because like if you talk to the Catholic Church, hey, who's in hell? The Catholic Church is going to say, I don't know, except for one category: Satan and his fallen angels.
Gotcha.
That if you really want to try to make something like this work, that's the angle of attack that you need to go, not on the human angle.
With respect to like a relationship between God and Satan and his fallen angels, I'm not sure what you mean.
Essentially, yeah.
Okay.
Because the argument that I put forth is very strong in the defense of humans on Earth not having this visible relationship with God.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right.
But once you start getting into the question of Satan and his angels, it's going to be a bit trickier. Now, there are defenses that can be put forth, especially on the nature of how free will, timelessness, because angels are outside of time and their ability to have knowledge. Like in a sense, Satan knew the pains of hell, quote unquote, before he experienced it, and he still chose it. So I do believe that there are defenses that could be made, but if you want your argument to be as strong as possible, that's the route of attack that you will find the most success in my perspective.
Okay. Gotcha. I will likely need more biblical knowledge to be able to do that. But
this is going to be it's going to be more than just biblical knowledge. This is actually going to be like high theological knowledge on the nature of eternity, the nature of I say eternity because that's the technical language, but the scientific term would be atemporal. But the atemporality of the angels, their natures and everything else like that, which again, you're going to have some disagreements depending on the Christian religions, but that's the route that you're going to have the most consistent and sure footing, instead of all of these different theological arguments as far as like how to answer the problem of divine hiddenness, because the ultimate crux that you're trying to get at is effectively, why are there people in hell if God desires this and that's contrary to his desire?
Sure. Right.
The existence of the angel or the demons and Satan is going to be the strongest point of attack, because there's too much ambiguity within the question for humans.
Gotcha. So now, how much? What is the possibility? Because this is all an internal critique, right?
Yeah.
If I were to attack the problem of divine hiddenness from the outside, to me it would simply be right that sure, okay, fine. If you want to say that God would want a relationship after the afterlife, none of this is falsifiable, right? There's nothing that you could observe on Earth that would disprove what occurs in the afterlife.
Yeah,
And so,
it's why the
yeah.
church, the Catholic Church, is silent on who's in hell. In fact, even though the Catholic Church has some very negative things to say about Judas, she still doesn't say that Judas is in hell. The only people that the Catholic Church say is in hell definitively is Satan and his legion of angels.
Right. Well, how would that relate to what is observable from Earth?
Oh, that's what I was getting at. Is like, because of the fact that we have to believe in God's grace and mercy, it even Judas, who betrayed Jesus, committed suicide, and all of the if there's anyone that one could claim that we know to be in hell, it would be Judas. And the church still says, no, we don't know.
Unknown. I see. Okay, right, but like the claim about who is in hell, that still is a non-falsifiable claim, because you cannot prove that anybody is, and you cannot prove that hell exists from an external observation. It relies on the assumptions made by the religion itself.
It's funny. So like Thomas Aquinas talked about basically argument from authority, and he said for most things, argument from authority is the weakest form of evidence. Like if Dr. Blitz said something about physics, like I trust him, and that is a form of evidence because I trust his knowledge and his expertise.
Sure.
But it's still the weakest form of evidence out there, other than me going and looking at the papers and looking at the evidence that he looked at himself. But he does say that for revelation, appeal to authority, divine authority, is now the strongest form of evidence for revelation. But at the same time, it's also kind of like the only form of evidence for like strictly revelatory matters, like, as you said, the existence of hell, the triune nature of God, these different things. So I would say it is falsifiable in the sense of like, if we can disprove God, or even disprove that Jesus had that authority to confer onto the church, then we basically, if we disprove the authority existing, then we've disproven the claims made by that authority. But that's a little bit different than like disproving the claim of hell itself.
Sure, but doesn't that rely, like, that then goes back to the idea that Catholicism says that you don't need to have this relationship out, on Earth. It can happen in heaven. So that sort of indicates to me that, well, actually, God has no reason to give you, provide that evidence, be the authority that tells you that.
So
it's give you evidence in that sense.
The argument that I was making earlier is more of, it could be the case that if the person was outside of invincible ignorance, that they would end up living a life that would ultimately end up to them rejecting God. Versus someone who, isn't in that invincible ignorance, they have the opportunity to build that relationship with God while here on Earth. So it's more of like God desires both, but he prefers the latter, if that makes sense. Like, if he had to choose between a relationship here on Earth, but it ends up to them losing eternity, or them not having a relationship on Earth, but them gaining eternity, he's going to choose eternity every single time.
Oh, well, I mean,
desire both.
If God has a desire for, I could then, that seem right. If God has a desire for something, it seems like God would want to take actions to bring about that desire. So would that not?
The Catholic Church talks about like two different wills or plans for God. You have like, God did not desire or want the fall of man to happen.
Sure.
But then the church also talks about the ineffable or unknowable plan of God, which is God didn't want the fall to happen, but he knew the fall would happen. And so he's working with the fall to achieve his ultimate goal. So it's kind of like, man, I would love to win, $1 million, but I know that that the lottery ticket that I bought isn't the winning one. So, but I do want the new car, so I'm going to work, even though that's not what I wanted, in order to get the new car.
Ugh. Okay, I'm struggling to differentiate between these two things in that case. So if this analogy with the lottery ticket, something you want, this seems to be more like the difference between, like an irrational desire, right? I would love to win the lottery and have a lot of money, whereas the rational desire is I know that to I must work to earn money, right? That's the thing that is actually most likely to bring about the outcome I want.
Yeah, and this ties into a little bit to something that Goatman brought up in the chat about the how can God be limited in this way? The limitation is not on God Himself. It is more of our choice. So this is then going to get into like one of the things that I love, but it's so frustrating for people who are outside. Almost every theological position in the church is interconnected. If you start trying to talk about the Eucharist, you then start talking about natures, which means you then start talking about the incarnation, which then leads you to start talking about the Trinity. As you see, we started on this conversation of what does it mean for someone to have a relationship with God, which
And
then
we're
leads to talking
going
about
all over the place, yeah.
yeah. So everything in Catholic theology is interconnected. That's why I was suggesting, hey, try to narrow it instead of worrying so much about like the question of humanity. Narrow it in to, because the ultimate critique that you're trying to get at is more made more prevalent in the revelation as far as like what happened with Satan and the angels, because no Christian can weasel their way out of, well, maybe it could be the case that they don't actually go to hell, unless you talk to a universalist who says that no, eventually Satan and the angels are going to leave hell.
Okay.
But at that point, your whole argument's going to fall apart anyways, because they're just going to say, yeah, no, like it's some version of what I just described, but they're going to claim that hell is part of that journey, which the Catholic Church denies. But if you're not talking to a universalist, where the angels or the Satan and his demons are in hell and they are going to be in hell for all of eternity, then that person is now going to be in a situation where if you can frame this argument to work within that framework, they are going to need to know a lot more deeper theology to escape it, or there's a hidden bullet that even I'm not fully aware of yet that we end up having to bite.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, cool. I think I've run out of what I'm capable of doing. I appreciate this very much.
Absolutely. I do know that there are other people in the guest, but it is time for me to end the live. But I do appreciate everyone coming. Let me see. So it looks like it was Len, user 634, bunch of numbers, Sokrim, People Poker, and Baradoc. If you're still in the guest request box, if you show up tomorrow, I'll make a note and I'll be here Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Central Time. And I'm always more than happy to have people join up and just, have conversations about, I want to try to keep it strictly to the philosophical God, but I don't mind giving insight into Catholic theology as long as you're not asking me to prove Catholic theology. But once again, that's going to be 9 to 11 Monday through Friday.